The Miami Dolphins are staring at the 13th pick in the 2025 NFL Draft, and the weight of that moment cannot be overstated. This is a team at a crossroads, a franchise that has spent years building toward contention, only to find itself still searching for that elusive next step. The debates rage on. Who should they pick? Which position must be prioritized? Best available player? Best defensive lineman? Best guard? The answers are shouted with absolute certainty by those who believe they already know the path forward, as if this draft, or any draft, has ever been a predictable, logical process. It hasn't. It never will be. And this year's draft? It feels different. This is not one of those drafts where the top is loaded with obvious, can't-miss prospects. This is a draft built on chaos, a draft where teams will sort players in vastly different ways, a draft that will see surprises, disappointments, and the kind of unforeseen developments that shake up the entire league. And that's where the Dolphins come in, because as much as they might have a plan, as much as they might have a vision, they must be prepared for the one thing that is guaranteed to happen on draft night, the unexpected. History has already proven this to be true. The Dolphins lived it firsthand in 2016 when Laremy Tunsil, a player considered a lock for the top 5, tumbled down the board in dramatic fashion. Miami had done its homework, even though, in reality, there was little reason to believe he'd be available when they picked. But he was. And when the moment came, they seized it. It was the right move then. It remains the right move now, even after Tunsil has long since moved on. And now, it could happen again. Miami has done its homework. On the expected names, of course, but also on players who, in theory, shouldn't be available at 13. Because that's what great teams do. They prepare for every possibility, especially the ones no one expects to become reality. Which is why, as draft night looms, there are 2 names that must be mentioned. 2 players who, if the board breaks a certain way, could force Miami into a decision they never thought they'd have to make. Will Campbell. Shedeur Sanders. Campbell is a puzzle to some, a prospect whose talent is undeniable, but whose future position is still up for debate. He played tackle at LSU, and he played it well. But his arms, some say, are too short for the next level. Maybe he can survive at tackle. Maybe he's a guard. Maybe that's a problem. Maybe it's not. What we do know is this: he's 6'6", 319 pounds, athletic, tough, technically sound, and has spent his collegiate career dominating the best competition the SEC has to offer. He is a violent, aggressive lineman, the kind of player who could stabilize Miami's offensive line for years to come. And yet, if teams hesitate, if teams overthink, if teams allow his supposed flaws to outweigh his strengths, he could slip. And if he does, Miami must pounce. This is an uncharted territory. The Dolphins have done this before. Tunsil played guard as a rookie, even though everyone knew he was eventually destined for tackle. He adjusted, adapted, thrived. Campbell could do the same. And if the rest of the league wants to get caught up in the details, if they want to overanalyze and nitpick and convince themselves that arm length outweighs everything else, then fine. That's their mistake. Miami should be more than happy to benefit from it. But Campbell is only part of this conversation, because as much as it might make people uncomfortable, as much as it might feel unnecessary, there is another scenario that cannot be ignored, and it involves a quarterback. The very idea of Miami drafting a quarterback at 13 will spark outrage in some circles. It will be called a distraction, a waste, an overreaction. And yet, it is something the Dolphins must at least consider. Because while Tua Tagovailoa is the present, the future remains uncertain. His talent is obvious. His production, when healthy, speaks for itself. But the reality is unavoidable. His injury history is real. His postseason success, or lack thereof, is a fact. And while Miami has spent years building around him, there's no guarantee that he will be the answer 5 years from now. So what happens if Shedeur Sanders is sitting there at 13? Sanders is one of the most polarizing quarterbacks in this draft class. His mechanics, clean. His accuracy, impressive. His ability to deliver with anticipation and touch, maybe as good as anyone's in this class. His confidence, well, that's the sticking point for some. Some love it. Some hate it. Some call it cocky. Some call it arrogance. Some question whether it will translate to the next level. And yet, what do the best quarterbacks in the NFL all have in common? Unwavering belief in themselves. There are knocks on Sanders. He holds onto the ball too long. He takes too many sacks. He's not a perfect prospect, but perfect prospects don't exist. What he does have are the traits that fit Miami's offensive system: ball placement, timing, rhythm. Traits that, in theory, could make him a seamless fit if, at any point, Tagovailoa is unavailable or if the organization decides to go in a different direction down the road.